Thank you all for coming out today. This talk is going to be a little different than you normally have here at Archbold. We're going to have some photos, drawings. We're going to look at tattoo art and masks and all kinds of things. We're combining art and science tonight and thinking about what is a species. There's three different categories of art we're going to look at here. Some photo portraits, field guide drawings, and then a big kind of grab bag I'm just calling abstraction. And each one of those, we're going to see what does this say about what a species is? And are any of them more accurate than the others? I don't normally start with my own bio here, but I wanted to put it up because this talk is a little bit different and it really relates to me. So one is I'm an educator here at Archbold. Two is I have an arts background, and most of you are familiar with me as a portrait photographer here. But I'm also currently in my fourth class in grad school, studying interdisciplinary studies. This talk is basically an excuse for me to process all of these different things that are going on in my head right now: Archbold things, art things, and grad school things. So thank you for coming. You gave me a reason to be able to do this, and it was really helpful because I've been trying to put it all together in my head. So I do have a little bit of academies at the beginning here. And so far, this is what I understand about grad school being a social scientist student, which we study a lot of philosophy and philosophy of science and all that kind of cool stuff. But basically, it's thinking about how we think about things and asking, what are things anyway? That's basically if you are studying philosophy or social sciences. And it breaks down to two big concepts that I think about as I'm falling asleep at night. Epistemology, these are the methods we use to think we know what is real. It's the kinds of questions, it's the kinds of evidence that we accept when we're building knowledge. And of course, that's going to be different for every different culture, both spatially today as well as temporally when we think about our ancestors. What did they think was an experience you could use to build knowledge about what is real? And then the last part there, ontology, that is the things. So epistemology is how do we know what's real? Ontology is what is real. It's the things and categories of things, which are determined by the constellation of the epistemologically derived facts. Here is the statement of what we're doing in this talk. We're taking artistic representations of animals seriously as opportunities to investigate the concept. Kind of a wild idea. It's a little bit like, for me, whenever I'm making portraits or a painting, I'm always thinking about what world did I create inside of this frame. When it comes to conservation photography, we're thinking, okay, probably there's a species at risk. Maybe we're telling a story about, or a person doing something important, but we'll also include maybe there's a bulldozer coming and it's about to go over that gopher tortoise burrow. And in that world, you've got a species at risk. In another picture of wildlife, maybe it looks very idyllic. There's no bad vibes going on in it at all. And if you were to say that these were fictional worlds created, what worlds have they made? Which one would you want to live in? I'm always thinking about that when I'm doing portraits. and what I'm including and not including in the frame. Even though it's photography and you're capturing what's there, it's still a conceptual art. So I wanted to apply that to other people. Some of this is my art, but most of it's not. Other people's art of wildlife. Okay, we're all together. I'm not going to read this here, but so biological species, that's what we're investigating today. And here's the definition that we know at Archbold in the sciences world. Species have to do with, can something reproduce with another individual? Okay, it's probably in the same species. Are they related by ancestry? Where do they fit inside of a taxonomic family tree? Is there a shared evolutionary history? All of those, we're all familiar with that here. But when I try to think of it from the bigger picture of that, like thinking about thinking, to me, a biological species is an idea that helps us find patterns in other living things. So, for example, here's a whole bunch of birds, and how many different categories would a person put on this? How many today would we put on it? What about our ancestors at different periods? Would they just say this is one thing? This is little brown bird, or would they have more? So today we can put them in these different species categories. The point here is that species is not something that exists outside. Species is a word, it's an idea that we made up. It describes real things, but it's a concept we made up. So if we're looking at art, what kinds of concepts can art come up with? Photo portraits. Here we go. This is part 1 of 3. Here's some pictures that I took from of insects in our collection. We have over 150,000 specimens in the insect collection here, which is pretty impressive, especially since most of them are Florida based and many of them are headwaters of the Everglades, most of them. And we even have the one on the left there, the blue calaminthe bee. That is the type species, which is, or the type specimen, which is pretty cool. That is the one that Mark used. Mark Darup, who for people who can't see online, Mark Darup is sitting right here in the front, used to describe this species. I ran into a problem with these pictures. I started taking these. I thought, wow, I'm making portraits of these. How cool is that? Instead of a portrait of a person, I'm going to try to do the same lighting and play with angles and get portraits of these specimens. So I started posting them online to BugNet, which is a project where anybody can post pictures up. If you know iNaturalist, this is kind of an earlier precursor to iNaturalist, but just for bugs. But then I got the message back, please don't post this. This is not a helpful taxonomic picture. You need to show us the morphological features that we can use to identify species. They don't want to see personality in their dead specimen photos. That was an interesting lesson to me when I first started working here. The big granddaddy of all photo portraits of animals is this one here, the Photo Arc by Joel Sartori. This is amazing. He has now photographed over 15,000 species. He's been doing this for 18 years, and his goal is to get to 20,000. He puts them, he builds little temporary photo studios and has artificial light on them, like you would do if you were going to pose any celebrity or someone like that. And he goes all over the world to do this. Sometimes he does video work as well. He has some fantastic Florida animals in here. So here's our scrub jay. This isn't from Archbold, but gosh, they're beautiful photos. And we've got Gopher tortoise. Both of these species, Archbold's been studying since the 1960s. It's part of our mission to save the rarest of the rare. Check this out. He even has Florida millipede in there and a Florida sand skink. My favorite thing about these two pictures, they were taken here. Actually didn't know he'd ever been to Archbold until I started putting this talk together and looking through. Does anybody here remember when he came? Like, did you meet him? Yeah. Did you help him find some millipedes? He did. Yeah, somebody did. Somebody did. Yeah. Okay. Okay. How cool is that? This is a one of a kind project. This is something that people all over the world are using to learn about species, and it's a conservation project. He's trying to raise awareness, and part of that has taken place here in Archbold. I mentioned earlier to people that were here that this is going to have a participatory part here, involvement from the crowd. If you're online, I know we've got a few people online, you can type in the chat and we have someone here who can read off your chat comments too. But we're going to try something that we do here at Archbold in our summer camps, which is to practice observation skills, saying, I notice. I'm going to take a look at this beautiful scrub jay picture. And what do you notice? Now, the idea here is only evidence. Don't make conclusions. Only observation evidence. That's it. So what do we see here? Right, nice. We've got bands on this bird. Okay. Okay. Well, what do you see that makes you say that? That sounds like a conclusion to me. Okay, so we've got a blue head. Thank you.
Male feathers are kind of patterned, like out of this front walk, running into things.
Cool. Okay. Any other evidences, observations, repeat saying? Okay, nice. So we had some of the details on the feathers, about the feathers and the face. Think now also think about this like I was saying, where you're creating a fictional world inside of the frame. We're still sticking to just observations, but thinking about it as a whole picture, any observations you would make of what's included, what's not included.
So just the size on the side of its head, it's looking right at you. It's not looking where the beak is. So this bird is looking.
I like that. Okay. Yeah, do we have an online comment? You can't tell. You can't tell. Yeah. The question was, what is this bird sitting on? You really can't tell. And maybe Joel photoshopped it out. I don't know. Anybody else? It's pretty good. Good job. Okay. I tried this, I did this myself. Here's what I came up with. You definitely noticed a bunch of stuff that I didn't. But this is a highly detailed picture, highly realistic, naturalistic colors, superficial details. I don't mean that in a critical way, like this bird's got no feelings. What I mean is we're really paying attention to what's on the outside of the bird. It's an isolated individual. There's no other birds in the picture. There's no background in the picture. We don't know anything about the ecology of this bird, only we just see this one bird. The other thing is, it's not a species, it's an individual. Earlier, I said that he photographed over 1,500 species. I was lying to you. He's photographed over 1,500 individual animals who happen to be from 1,500 different species. And that'll make sense why I'm stressing that when we look at our other categories. And actually, Mark noticed this one. There's an awareness with the animal and us, but a distance at the same time. Cool. So if we expand that out and now start pulling some conclusions together, what kind of species exists in the world of these photos? We have a biological species are made of individual subjects. That's the unit. They're mortal. Photograph is a time capsule. Photograph of a living thing is a photograph of something that's going to die. And most photographs are photographs of things that have already. Well, maybe not now because we've taken a lot of photos in the last 10 years, but historically, um, the species are separate from each other and from us, and they are knowable without an environment. They're knowable without other species. They exist just by themselves. Next section here, field guide drawings. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of art theory before I dive into these to keep us kind of changing the way we think a little bit. We have almost everybody in here is a biologist too. So I don't know if this stuff seems normal and you're like, obviously, Dustin, this is all pretty normal stuff for us, or if this is like your brain is doesn't like it. Anybody speak French here? Anybody know what this says? This is oh, yeah, Fred. Yeah. This is a famous painting by Magritte, and it says, "This is not a pipe." But obviously, it is a pipe. But it's not a pipe. What is it? It's a painting of a pipe, except for that's not true either. It, yes, exactly. It's a projection of a digital image of a painting of. So those photographs we were just looking at, we weren't looking at the animal, right? We were looking at pictures of the animal. And when you're getting away from photography and into drawing, we have this kind of sliding scale here with complexity, realism, and that's very specific to an individual all the way on one side. And then as we abstract, simplified, iconic, universal. These things are like nice little bunches that go together. So if you're somewhere in the middle there, which is like what a lot of comic books, where a lot of comic books are, kind of the middle. So you might be able to identify with the character because it's obviously not a real specific person. Um, so when we pull up these other drawings, think about where do they lie? Where do they lie in here? And also think about the line themselves. Just like when you're speaking, the way you use language, if you are staccato, like, we are going to look at these pictures. If you're really soft like this, if you're, don't pictures, aren't they terrible? I don't know. I'm not good at that part, but the way we talk says something, communicates something. Your lines communicate something too. They create the world too, not just what you're drawing or how abstract it is, the line work itself. So keep all that in mind here. When it comes to field guides, there's a lot of different kinds out there. I'm going to cherry pick some things to make my points, but you could try this same activity we've been doing with any piece of art. So here's pretty typical what people are used to seeing in a field guide for birds. The one on the left is from the book All of the Birds of the World. It has over 11,000 drawings of birds in it. Amazing. The one on the right is from the 1941 Peterson's Field Guide for Birds. Not that much has changed. Peterson figured it out. He figured out how to draw birds or paint birds in a way that you could identify them in the field. And we're not going to do that little observation on this one. But if we did, we would notice things like, again, we don't have backgrounds in here. They're not generally exhibiting much behavior. They're just kind of standing there for us. Hey, look at this guy. This is Mark Dara, and we're going to look at some of his drawings of ants in a second here. And his is what I really want to focus on for um, for our activity today. Here are some ant drawings that he did for that Florida ant book. And we can see that on our abstraction scale, we're pretty realistic here, a little bit abstracted. And this is mainly focused on, same with the Peterson books, the Peterson book, how to identify something. What are the morphological features we need to know? So let's try it with this one. And I'll call on you again. Some observations. What is going on in this picture? Joe, all right.
A really high level of detail. Looks like hundreds, if not thousands, of little hairs, etc. The lines above the legs. So very highly detailed.
Okay, highly detailed. Nice. What other observations? What's going on in this picture? Well, I was nice to you, right? I didn't make anybody feel dumb. Okay, yeah.
Specific anatomical parts, but it seems like the middle is very small compared to the thorax. I don't know the last part compared to the other body parts.
Yeah, so
and then I'm thinking that the lack of value where it's white indicates that maybe it's like shiny or something like that.
love it. Yeah. We have an animal with some unique structures on it. We also can see that there was some deliberate styling going on here with or some deliberate shading to give some roundness to the animal. So this isn't totally abstracted, but it has a little bit of artistic things, skill, and things that are not a little bit of skill, a lot of bit of skill, but it has some artistic things happening in it. That good? Anybody else?
Shows it from multiple angles.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So if we posted this to the bug net, they would be thrilled, right? Yeah, we've got different angles on here. So we see everything we need to know to figure out what species this is. Okay. I'm gonna go on unless is there anybody else? I'm gonna keep moving. Yes, Fred.
Reflect much body shape, whereas the ant has a hard exoskeleton and the light shines off it. So that reveals what the texture is of the body versus say a bird, right? So,
yeah, because I had the bird photos up and they looked very flat. So some of these same things that I was saying that you were all noticing. Isolated but related to other ants. And those other pictures you'd see when Mark displays these, generally it might be like one genus and then a whole bunch of ants that are related to it. So these are not like the last one was a picture of the photographs was a picture of an individual. These are pictures of species, not individuals. So it's all about relationship to other ants and what defines them as being a species.
it's really conspicuous. You're only showing half the ant. So it's like somebody took an ant and sliced it right down the middle because you only see one set of legs. So, because that's all you need to see. The other side of the legs looks just the same. So, but it makes it look very as if you made a trophy specimen, cut it in half and plastered it on a piece of wood or something. So to me, it actually looks very unnatural, but it shows what it's supposed to show.
Am I the only one that never noticed that it
No.
that it didn't have 6 legs? Yeah.
May I ask a quick question? Did you choose to do it that way, or is there a standard that says to do it that way?
No, I chose to do it that way.
Okay.
If we look at Mark's ant drawings and create a world out of them and say, what is a species? We have species. Biological species are recognizable by their form, by their morphological features that all individuals share in a species. They're timeless. It's not like a picture of a bird that was a bird taken at a specific time and place. These are timeless, as in they're independent from time. We don't know if they're extinct or not extinct or what. They're related to others in their genus, but we also, again, don't have any background. So these are knowable apart from their environment in this conception of species. When you're actually reading the book, of course, there's all kinds of text to go along and describe other things too, but we're just thinking about the pictures. Our third section here, abstract animals. And I said this is kind of a grab bag of a bunch of different stuff. But to me, all of the examples here are making the same point. They're all telling the same picture about species. Starting with the Book of Kells, which is about 1,200 years old, we have pictures of animals. On our realistic to abstract scale, pretty far on the abstract side of the scale. But if you really follow along, you can figure out what you're looking at. Right? I'm gonna walk away from. Hi. So how many animals can we see and what are they? And any guesses? Okay, we've got the snake bird. Good, Hannah. That goes to this one who's upside down right here. Yeah, they use the same basic face for mammal, essentially a dog, or they have lions too. They all kind of look the same, wolves. And then we've got one more here, again, a doggish animal. So we've got three. What I like about these is they follow rules. So even though they don't follow biological rules, they follow visual language. So all of these should have the right number of legs and all of that. It's just that they may be in weird places. I love it. There's artists today that are still learning from the Book of Kells, making art based out of it, and some of them are amazing tattoo artists. Here we have a picture of a heron eating a fish. I see up at the top. I'm gonna screw it up. I'm not gonna push anything. Can we all see the heron head? Big heron head, right? And things are pretty mixed in. There's a lot going on. We have the salmon of knowledge, which is like an Irish kind of mythology, folklore thing. So we've gone really far on our abstract side here, so that this is no longer a specific real salmon, but represents a mythic salmon. And then the artist has put in some really ancient designs, pre-medieval designs. Yes. This is a fish right here. It just has ears. But look behind it. It's got the rest of it looks like a fish. I'll say this. It's at least part finch. Yeah. These are all from the same artist. All these ones I'm showing. This is a guy in Wales. Sacred Knot Tattoo is the place. So here again, we see we've got a dog over here. There's a lot happening. It still has its paws. Like here's a paw right there. It's a paw there. It's got all its paws. Over here, we have an ancient Irish elk. And if we follow it all around, same thing. All the parts are there. And then we've got a cute little lizard in there. There's some fish at the bottom. Has anybody here ever seen this artwork before? Do you know where this is from, Joe? These are my tattoos. Yeah, these are my tattoos. I,
Yeah.
they're my actual ones. I know that Katie knows, but I was really, yeah. So this talk really is an excuse for me to show you my tattoos. Here's Deborah Mitchell, who most of us here are familiar with. She's a Miami-based artist, and she does work here at Archbold. And I love these three pieces are really cool. This one on the right is a new one that she did with the Florida Parks Foundation, where you can buy merchandise with it. But in all of these, we have wildlife, but not depicted in the traditional, ways. Even in the photograph, where the wildlife is depicted through a skull and not through pretty happy animal bouncing through there. Kristen Egan. This is one of my favorite artists, and she does masks. Really interesting. Some would say creepy. It's hard to tell sometimes if they're creepy or whimsical. And then she makes self-portraits wearing the masks too. And she tries to match up the backgrounds with these characters that she's created. She talks about being inspired by an art history class she took in college that was about learning about masquerades and how a performer in a masquerade, generally in a traditional society, is no longer human. When that mask is on, they're that character. And that's a very real thing for the people that are around them and for themselves. And in fact, that the actions they take and the things they do, they're not culpable for it. It's not that person that's wearing it. It is a new creature there when the mask isn't a new being. Well, look who's back. We've got more Mark Dare. This talk was also an excuse for me to scan some of his artwork. We're heavily in the abstract side here. We have two marked tortoises. One has gained a human head. The other one still looks pretty gopher tortoisey. Mark, the one on the left, was there a specific turtle or anything that was based off of? Yeah. So we've gone to the point here where human and other animals have merged, similar to in Kristen's artwork. Okay, let's try this for the last time with Kristen's piece now. So, what do you notice? What's going on in this picture?
Split between day and night, the way she painted the ears, the first thing.
Oh, cool.
Multiple eyes, I can never have enough of them if you're a rabbit.
If you couldn't hear that, Mark said, multiple eyes, you can never have enough of them if you're a rabbit. I think Kristen is on the Zoom, so we'll see what she thinks about that. Anybody else? It's looking at things. Oh, out of place.
George said it looks out of
Yeah.
place. Yeah. Kristen said perfect about the previous thing.
The eyes.
The
Yeah.
eyes.
This is very detailed, but at the same time, it's very abstract. There's a lot of creative license with the animal form happening here. In these pictures, we have the environment, but thinking of all of those pictures I just showed with the abstract stuff, in a lot of them, there's environments or there's elements of the environment included, and the boundaries are pretty blurry between individuals and species. Now, I took off biological here when I said species are, because we're kind of in a different world right now. Species are entangled, interconnected, related to each other, only loosely bound by biological rules. They're subjective beings. They're, basically beings with agency. They're examples of and participants in patterns of nature, like seasonal cycles and other cycles too. So that brings us to, we're going to wrap up here. And by looking at these three categories, we've created three different ways of understanding what a species is. So let's just think about them for a minute. And I'm interested to see when we get to the questions, if there's also comments too. But we have an individual, taxonomic, and intra-related. So the individual one, we interact with animals one-on-one as fellow living individuals. However, strong boundaries separate us and separate them from others and their surroundings. Taxonomic, this is the one that is closest to the definition in the beginning. Species are made of related individuals whom share ancestry and morphological features. They can be understood with a taxonomic tree of life. But also, that's not just a DNA thing, though. It is the form features. And intra-related, individuals and species do not exist except as in relationship with other living things and the environment. Species have recognizable forms, but they can shape change and cross interspecies barriers. The word intra-related, what that means is it's kind of based off of interrelated. I didn't make it up. But interrelated is not only is there a quite close connection with other things, but you literally don't exist apart from them. An example that might work here is the biota in our guts, right? Like we don't exist separate from them. That's kind of the thing, but it's philosophical, but also biological too. All of these contain truth, but none have all the truth. And these three, I remember that word ontology earlier, which is basically what is real. These three ontologies, we could add a whole lot more. Like, for example, let's say that the portraits photos include backgrounds. What would that do? What if the taxonomic drawings, what if they have behaviors drawn on them? Now we have a fourth and a fifth version of what a species is. So everything that the artist does creates a new world in it. And my point here is that we can use art as a way to reflect on what is real and the ideas that we use in science. Science has a lot of rules. It has to be done a certain way. But what happens when we see the world through animals having the ability to shape change, when you put on a mask, you become a different creature, all of those types of things. A human and a bear can have children together, or all kinds of things like that. It starts changing how we think about things. What other ways of representing nature could be used in this way? So that's an open question to y'all. And that's it for the talk. So thank you very much. And Laura, so we have Kristen on. Is Deborah on there too?
Yes, Deborah said thanks, Dustin, when you.
Cool. So I'd love to hear general thoughts on some of this stuff, but also if there's questions for me or for Kristen or Deborah, we've got all of us here, or Mark. Go.
Species, families, orders, etc., are an epistemological framework inherently. Historians were kind of obsessed with that whole notion of classification and categorization. When you were building this talk, is that like a foil to play against as you're thinking about it? Or did you not really think about that concept at all? Because I mean, as soon as you mentioned epistemology, that was the first thing I thought was, that's Victorians were very much about classifying, ordering things, trying to bring order to what they viewed as like the chaos. I'm just curious your thoughts on this.
I wasn't thinking specifically about them, but I was doing a lot of reading about just how everything is a concept. And we take a lot of it for granted as it just being real. There was a book that came out like 50 years ago called Scientific Revolutions, and it gets into that really well. That says that when people make theories, the theory isn't a complete thing. It doesn't answer all questions, and the scientists at the time have to use the tools and make the observations they make based on the paradigm of that time. And so I was thinking more of that, but then thinking, well, what about my ancient Druid ancestors? What scientific paradigm did they live inside of, or other groups? And when you play with art, you can have total fantasy too. It doesn't. These artists, they don't care if they're thinking about what a species is. They just make whatever they want. But then it becomes a fun activity to say, let's take it seriously that they do have their own paradigm of understanding the world, and it all has to exist inside of these pictures. So that's more where it was coming from.
Alright,
But I
think-
agree with you.
Mark, did you have a question? Did you raise your hand with a question?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well, I have a question for you.
Okay.
From Deborah. For Mark, what are you working on now?
At the moment, I'm still working on insects and deadwood and insects in general. I'm not doing many drawings, but I'm doing a lot of casual, semi-abstract drawings. So one of the things about taxonomic drawing is that all the structures that are there mean something. They're an evolutionary whole, and those structures evolve in certain ways and they have certain functions. So one of the things that's interesting to do is to drag yourself away from that to looking at an organism where the structures don't necessarily have an evolutionary meaning, but have a human meaning. So that the turtle there has a lot of human meanings put into it. But if you were trying to think about evolutionarily, how would that turtle work? Then you'd end up with a really interesting kind of idea of how evolution would be really different from the way it actually works. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah.
Alright, Bernadette, did you?
Facet to the idea about what is a species. Because if you look at the Associated Press handbook, you never capitalize the English name of a species. But if you look at the scientific literature, we always capitalize the English name of a species, because a blue jay in caps means a certain species, but a blue jay in lower case means any bird that's blue, looks like a jay. So if you go to a handbook of grammar and read all the rules about capitalization, you realize that there's a long tradition that doesn't quite make sense about what words get capitalized, like the bishop and the president, and so on. So even it's this conflict between the way people look at the world. And if you look at the drawings of the Northwest Coast Indians, all of these animals have attributes, like a raven is very smart and brave, and a killer whale is a killer. And they have observed these organisms in the field being hunters and gatherers, and they see their attributes and they put it in their art. Whereas some other societies, they hadn't got to the point where they're looking at what these species do and how they function, and they just take their shapes and use their imagination. So I think a lot is tied up with this idea of whether an English name for a species should be capitalized or not. And it shows that the Associated Press are ecologically illiterate, perhaps, where scientists look at a species and they know exactly its function in a food web, something like that.
I just like that we now have that quote we can use for future newspaper articles about the Associated Press. So, yeah, I think that way of thinking is very similar to what I'm doing here. Yeah, whether you capitalize something or not, to the someone who's uninterested in what a species is, they don't care. They just don't want to get a bad grade at school, or they want their editor to yell at them. But they actually have these really powerful ideas behind them. It's pretty cool.
Someone else raised their
Yeah, we had
hand first
Hannah.
thing.
I really liked your talk. Just a couple reflections. The first one, actually, can you put that back up?
Oh, I just destroyed it.
It's okay, no
I was
worries.
trying to let Kristen and Deborah talk. Dang it.
Okay. Well, I guess what
I
I was gonna
shouldn't have
say,
touched it.
the first one, my first takeaway is like I hadn't really thought about there's this like post-humanism aspect to all of this, in which are like humans are everything at the center, and we've like
Mhm.
created this world in which we study things, and the separateness that we have like imbued into everything, into our concept of biological species. So we're looking at all of the separate entities by themselves. Like you're saying, a lot of these images don't have a background to them. They're not shown in the whole ecosystem. Maybe it's affecting how we approach ecological problems from a species centered viewpoint, which is really important too, you know. On the flip side of it, something you didn't show was phylogenies. And I think that's sometimes what brings it back together, where it shows how all of these species fit in with each other and how they tell a story of evolutionary history. Um, but yeah, it definitely got me thinking how much of our our like ecological theory, conservation is rooted in this like idea of separateness, like just like separate units and not a whole system. So those are my reflections, and thanks for the opportunity to think about those things.
Cool. And I'd say I think that's really cool. That's parallels a lot of the stuff that I was thinking too. And some of those ideas I would have liked to put in, but I couldn't figure out how to have evidence for them from the photos. But for example, when I think of what is an individual, I think we have to keep in mind that all of our cell or many of our cells are alive. They're also individuals making choices at some level about the activities that they do, and that we have all this other DNA in us too, because there's all these other organisms living in us. So an individual, like what's an individual when you start thinking about all of that? And that's part of the post-humanism stuff too. Yeah, cool.
Okay, I've added Deborah and Kristen back as panelists, so they should be able to talk if they're in a place that they can. And George has a question for Mark.
My question for Mark is, Mark, on your taxonomic and interrelated drawings, are you trying to make a point, or are you just doing it just because you like what's your mission when you sit down and you make one of these drawings? What are you trying to do?
You need a taxonomic one?
Taxonomic or the interrelated ones?
Yeah, the taxonomic one is obviously to help people identify different species. But in aggregate, you can flip through them all and you get a feel for how varied ants are, which is something nobody sees because they all are smaller than the sesame seed on your bagel. So I think one of the major points I have is how incredibly detailed nature is when you look at it close up. And a lot of people, their first experience with the microscope is they look at that thumbnail and it's like, oh, this is really gross. Look at all this junk in there. But if you look at a bug, it's not like that. It's like there's an enormous amount of detail. And in a way, I think the first people who looked at through microscopes thought they were looking at craftsmanship. So it's really very, very striking. So, but with a turtle, I had certain things I was pushing out. Like there's a whole set of little eyes on the edge of the shell with little highlights in them. there are a lot of things in that, but, and the round thing in the joint that's a typical Northwest Indian type thing to do. That's one of their symbols of a joint but I put little things on it. So, so they have meanings, but, but the ant is, no, this is not the most fancy looking ant, but it does show you that there's a huge amount of detail just in the ant. And this is a fire ant, which you would be delighted to stomp on. So, so it's good to see what things look like before you stomp on them.
Well, to wrap up, I'm wondering if I can put Kristen and Deborah on the spot. If you want to put your video on and say a minute or two, any thoughts that this talk brings up for you, and also to thank. Deborah didn't know that she was going to be in the show because I wanted to surprise her. I knew she was coming on, but Kristen did. So thank you to both of them. And then and Mark, and then Fred helped me too in the library finding a whole bunch of old field guides too.
Let's see. Can you hear me, guys?
So, well, let's let Deborah go.
Yes, yeah, turn the speaker on so everyone can hear you.
Okay, I apologize. I'm in the wicked Miami traffic, but very grateful to be able to participate. What a great world it is that we can actually do these incredible Zooms while we're navigating to and fro. So thank you very much for giving me one moment. I actually want to turn the tables a little bit, Dustin. Have you ask everybody, or if they can hear me, fantastic. In this closing minute or so, what do the biologists, what do the scientists say about how we can be more effective communicators as artists? I would just love to pretend we're sitting at my dining room table and you guys can really just throw out some ideas at us. I mean, I rely on data and attendance views and those types of metrics to measure if the work is having an impact, but I would just love to hear if anyone there has some new ideas that I could maybe incorporate into my outreach programs.
Just a real easy softball question for everybody.
Well, you know how I am.
How do you measure impact of what artists do? You know, I see a National Geographic storyteller, official storyteller here, and what do you what do you think, George? Impact.
How do you, it's of my opinion that impact depends on the audience you're trying to reach, the verbiage you use, and the way you depict your art, right? Because in order to get conservation done in a state like Florida, you have to be able to appeal to all sides of it. So if you look at any conservation campaign that's been done and it's been successful here, you can go back and look at the words that were used as a call to action and how the art was depicted. So I think to answer a question, not for nothing, you just have to just keep making really good art that's very relatable to your audience. You have to know your audience and what you're trying to do. It doesn't make sense to make something that appeals broadly because not everybody's going to go for what you're trying to do. So focus your efforts and be very intentional in what you're doing.
That's a great answer. We see wheels turning here, but I don't see a lot of hands raised. I think this is something that everybody's gonna have to think about a little bit.
So, Kristen, what about you? Do you want to pop on for a final word? You get the last word. Oh no, Mark had a question too.
That's high pressure. Well, that was a great talk, so thank you. That was it's a fun mental exercise trying to like break down why you think about things in certain ways, because I think you do take it for granted. Doing the masks, it's been interesting because when I first started making them, it was kind of fresh out of art school. So for all of you that don't know, Dustin and I were studio buddies at art school. So when I started doing the masks, they were more kind of traditional, 2 eyes, you put it on like it looks like an animal. And then I sort of phased out of doing the masks, and for a while I was making small sculptures. They were almost these kind of little like totemic figurines, and that's where I really kind of honed the stylization of them. So that's where like the multiple eyes came in, and I would do things like stack multiple faces on one body. And then a few years later, I kind of came back to doing the masks, and the masks, instead of being like I'm creating this individual character that's like an animal, they were more I kind of think of them as they're blown up versions of those little totems. So it's more like they're representing like the idea of an animal versus like a physical individual, which kind of goes along with the whole kind of different ways of thinking about things. And also you saw in there were multiple examples of rabbits. So in certain individual pieces, I will either think about, some of them are very specifically like, one of them in those examples was a barn owl, one of them was a bobcat. So I was thinking about more specific species from the more traditional sense, but then sometimes and also in gathering the materials for making them, I'll think of them more like in family groups, like rabbits, deer, canines, and maybe not broken down more specifically than that. So there's definitely always like fluctuating levels of specificity and species versus, you know, families of animals when I'm working on them. But yeah, I think it was all very relevant.
Cool. Thank you. And thank you all for coming.